Whenever you are developing a system that controls a piece of machinery, that can affect the external environment, that can affect the flow of significant amounts of money, or can otherwise result in an expensive failure, it's important to think about what the worst-case failure can be if you get the software wrong. The worst case might not be obvious without some thought. For some applications, such as an aircraft, it's pretty clear that if the flight controls don't work, you're going to have an unacceptable loss. But for something like a household thermostat, coming up with a worst case might take some thought. You might think that the worst that can happen to a thermostat is that it gets room temperature wrong and someone has to override it. And to be sure, such failures are annoying. But there are worse things that can happen. A malfunctioning thermostat might cause extremely high utility bills if it consistently overheats or overcools the house, especially if nobody's home. Perhaps worse, a thermostat can stop working because of a software defect and result in damage to the house. For example, in January 2016, smart thermostats lost their battery power because of a software bug, and as the headline says, plunged the customers into the cold. If those customers were in a northern climate and left town to go to someplace warm in the middle of January, that failure could result in frozen pipes and potentially thousands of dollars in water damage and water bills due to flooding from broken pipes. An important exercise when you're designing your system is to ask, what's the worst that can happen? Usually, the best way to do this is to use a thought experiment and think about the following. If the designers of the system, including you yourself, modified the software to do the worst possible damage, what could happen? Now, I'm not saying that you will do this intentionally, but from a critical system point of view, a lot of ensuring your system is safe ends up being making sure an unintentional bug that happens to do that bad thing isn't really there. So this question focuses you on thinking about the hazards that could happen, whether you think they're likely to happen or not, and for the designers to make sure they mitigate every one of those hazards to make sure they cannot happen even due to an unintentional software defect. The consequences for failure can vary dramatically depending on the situation. It is often helpful to think of them in terms of very wide bins, such as whether they result in multiple fatalities, a single fatality, severe injuries, or minor injuries. Typically, anything involving a fatality is treated with significantly more engineering rigor than something that results just in injuries. For mission-critical systems, one can consider a parallel set of bins, but instead of injuries or fatalities, those bins range from entire corporation failure down to a very minor financial loss.